I'll never forget the look on Catherine's face when her lawyer went silent. We were sitting in a conference room on the 9th floor of a glass office building in downtown Denver. Gray carpet, long mahogany table. Her attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s named Diane Pritchard, had been supremely confident for the past 20 minutes, walking through the settlement demands with the kind of measured efficiency that comes from winning cases like mine 100 times before. Catherine sat beside her, arms crossed, jaw set. She hadn't looked at me once since we'd sat down. Diane had just finished explaining why I should sign over the house. Marital asset, she'd said. Decades of shared investment. My wife deserved security. The math was simple, she told me. I could buy Catherine out, or we could sell and split it down the middle. Either way, Catherine had rights. Then my attorney, a quiet man named Gene Holloway, who'd known my father, slid a single document across the table. Before we proceed, Gene said softly, I think you'll want to review this. Diane picked it up, scanned the first page, turned to the second. Her expression didn't change right away. But I saw it, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her lips pressed together. She flipped back to the first page. Read it again. Slower this time. Then she set the paper down very carefully and looked at Catherine. We need a moment, she said. What? Catherine leaned forward, irritation flashing across her face. What is it? Diane slid the document toward her. It's a land deed. Catherine glanced down. I watched her skim the words, not understanding at first. Then her eyes caught on the date, the name. She looked up at me, and for the first time that day, she actually saw me. This doesn't, she started. The house, Diane said quietly, is built on land that was deeded solely to your husband in 1988. Before your marriage. It was never a marital asset. The room went very, very still. Catherine's face drained of color. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, hands folded on the table. The same way I'd sat through 32 years of marriage, calm, steady, watching everything I'd built come down to a piece of paper. And the truth neither of them had bothered to check. Let me explain how we got here. Catherine and I met in 1985. At a community fundraiser in Fort Collins. I was 28, working as a civil engineer for a mid-sized firm that designed municipal water systems. She was 26, teaching 3rd grade at an elementary school near Old Town. She had this laugh, bright and unguarded, and when she smiled at me over a table of donated baked goods, I felt something shift. We talked for 2 hours that night, about nothing important, about everything that mattered. We were married 14 months later, in a small ceremony at her parents' church. Nothing fancy. Her mother cried. My father shook my hand and told me I'd chosen well. He died 8 months after that. Heart attack. He was 63. In his will, he left me the land, 40 acres in the foothills west of Loveland, land his own father had bought in the 1940s when it was still cheap and wide open. Rolling prairie grass, pine clusters, a view of the Rockies that could stop your breath on a clear morning. He'd always told me it would be mine someday, that I'd know what to do with it. Catherine and I were renting a duplex in town at the time. Small place. Thin walls. We'd talk late into the night about what we wanted. A real home someday, space, quiet, a place to raise kids. When I inherited the land, I told her I wanted to build something there. With my own hands, a house that would last. She looked at me like I'd just promised her the world. It took us 3 years. I did most of the work myself. Weekends, evenings, every spare hour. Foundation, framing, plumbing, and electrical with help from guys I knew in the trade. Catherine was there for all of it. She'd bring lunch on Saturdays, sit on a stack of lumber, and sketch out ideas for the kitchen layout. We picked out every fixture together, every paint color. She wanted big windows facing west. I built them. When we finally moved in the spring of 1992, she stood in the empty living room and cried. Happy tears, she said. The kind you cry when a dream becomes real. We had 32 years in that house. We never had children. We tried early on, but it didn't happen. After a few years, we stopped talking about it. It hurt too much. We poured ourselves into other things. Her students, my projects, the garden she built on the south side of the house. We traveled a little. Modest trips, Yellowstone, the Oregon coast. One long winter in Santa Fe. People would say we were a solid couple. Steady, we didn't fight much. Disagreements, sure, but nothing that left scars. I thought we'd figured out how to be married. How to make it work. I retired 4 years ago at 67. Catherine kept teaching for another year, then retired herself. We talked about what came next. Maybe selling, moving somewhere smaller, spending more time near her sister in Arizona. But we stayed. The house was ours. I'd built it. Every board, every nail. I knew its bones. And Catherine loved it. Or at least I thought she did. Looking back now, I can see when things started to change. Small things at first. She'd go quiet during dinner, spend more time on her phone. She started taking long walks in the afternoon without asking if I wanted to come. I figured it was just age. Retirement adjustment. We'd been so busy for so long. Maybe she just needed space to figure out who she was, without a classroom full of 8-year-olds. I gave her that space. I worked in my shop, fixed up the deck, restained the pergola she'd always loved. I thought I was being considerate, patient, the kind of husband you're supposed to be after 3 decades. But the distance grew. She started sleeping in the guest room. Said I snored too loud, that she wasn't sleeping well. I offered to see a doctor. She waved it off. It's fine, she said. Just easier this way. Then she stopped saying I love you before bed. Then she stopped saying much at all. I told myself it was a phase, that we'd work through it the way we always had, steady, together. I didn't realize she'd already made up her mind. I didn't know she was planning her. And I had no idea she thought the house, my house, the one I'd built with my own hands on my father's land, was hers to take. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when she finally said the words. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. Catherine had barely touched her plate, said she wasn't hungry. She'd been standing by the window for 10 minutes looking out at the garden, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. David, she said quietly, we need to talk. I dried my hands on the towel and turned around. Something in her voice made my chest tighten. Okay, I said. What's on your mind? She didn't look at me, just kept staring out the window. I've been thinking a lot lately, she said. About us, about where we are. I pulled out a chair at the table. Sit down. Let's talk about it. She hesitated, then came and sat across from me. Her hands were folded in her lap. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. I don't think we're happy anymore, she said. The words landed like a stone in still water. What do you mean? I asked carefully. Catherine, if something's wrong, we can work on it. We always have, she shook her head. That's just it, David. We don't work on things. We just exist side by side, going through the motions. I don't understand. If you've been unhappy, why didn't you say something sooner? I have been saying something. Her voice had an edge now. You just don't listen. I searched my memory. Had I missed something? Conversation? A moment? Then tell me now, I said. I'm listening. She sighed, the kind of sigh that says she's already exhausted by the conversation. You're so set in your ways, David. Every day is the same. You wake up, you make your coffee. You go out to the shop, you putter around. You come in for lunch. You watch the news. You go to bed. It's like living with a routine. I thought you liked our routine, I said. You never said you wanted to do something different. See? That's exactly what I mean. She finally looked at me, and there was something in her eyes I didn't recognize. Frustration. Maybe resentment. I shouldn't have to tell you. After 32 years, you should just know. I felt like I was trying to solve a problem without the right tools. Okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to travel more? Take up a hobby together? I'm open to anything, Catherine. Just tell me what you need. I need space, she said flatly. Space. Yes, space to figure out who I am, what I want. I've spent my whole adult life being a wife, being a teacher. I retired a year ago and I thought I'd feel free, but I just feel stuck. Stuck, I repeated. The word hurt more than I expected. Not because of you, she added quickly, though it didn't sound convincing. It's just this phase of life. I need to figure out what comes next. I reached across the table. She didn't pull away, but she didn't take my hand either. We can figure it out together, I said. That's what marriage is. We've been through hard things before. This isn't hard, David. It's just empty. The word hung between us. Empty. I pulled my hand back. Do you still love me? I asked. She looked away again. Out the window. At the garden. At anything but me. I don't know, she said. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to fight for her, to convince her we still had something worth keeping. But another part, the part that had built this house, that understood foundations and load-bearing walls, knew that you can't force something to hold weight it was never designed to carry. What do you want to do? I asked quietly. I think we should spend some time apart, she said. Not forever, just sometime. So I can think. Apart how? You want me to leave? No, she said quickly. No, maybe separate spaces in the house. For now. Until I figure things out, I nodded slowly. If that's what you need. Thank you, she said, and there was relief in her voice. Like I'd just given her permission to let go. She stood up, smoothed her sweater, and walked toward the hallway. Then she paused. I know this isn't easy, she said, her back still to me. But I think it's what's best. For both of us. I didn't answer. She disappeared into the guest room and closed the door. I sat there in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. The house I'd built. The house where we were supposed to grow old together. I thought about what she'd said, set in my ways, going through the motions, empty. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd been so focused on keeping everything steady that I'd missed the fact that she was slipping away. I wanted to fix it. That's what I did, I fixed things. But you can't fix something when you don't know what's broken. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this wasn't about space, or self-discovery, or figuring things out. She'd already figured it out. She just hadn't told me yet. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning. 6 weeks after that conversation in the kitchen, I was out on the deck with my coffee, watching the light come up over the Rockies. October light, thin and golden, the kind that makes everything look like it's been painted. The aspens on the lower ridge had gone full yellow. Catherine's garden was bare now, the last of the season cleaned out. She'd done that herself 2 weeks earlier, without saying much about it. I heard the mail truck at the end of the driveway. By the time I walked out to the box, the truck was already gone. There were 3 envelopes. A utility bill, a seed catalog that still came every fall out of habit, and a large manila envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. A law firm, Denver. I stood at the end of the driveway and opened it. Inside was a cover letter. 2 pages of legal language and a formal document titled Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. I read it twice, standing right there in the gravel in my slippers. In the October cold, Catherine was filing for divorce. I won't pretend I wasn't blindsided. I'd sensed the distance. I'd felt the marriage cooling for months, maybe longer. But there's a difference between feeling something and seeing it typed out in legal language on official letterhead, between knowing a thing is dying and holding the death certificate in your hands. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table, set the envelope in front of me, made myself read it again, slowly this time, every word. The cover letter was from Diane Pritchard, attorney at law. It was professional, cordial even. It explained that Catherine had retained her firm to represent her interests in the dissolution proceedings. It encouraged me to retain my own legal counsel at my earliest convenience. Standard language, impersonal. But it was the attached property demand that stopped my breathing. Catherine's legal team had listed the house as a primary marital asset. They'd included an estimated property valuation, a number that made my jaw tighten, and had outlined 2 options. Option 1, I could buy Catherine out at 50% of the appraised value. Option 2, the property would be listed for sale and the proceeds split equally. They gave me 30 days to respond. What struck me wasn't the audacity of the demand, though it was audacious. What struck me was the precision of it. The valuation had been done already. The timeline was specific. The language was practiced. This hadn't been drafted in a week. Someone had been working on this for months, while I was restaining the pergola, while I was making her coffee in the morning, while I was sleeping 2 rooms away, telling myself it was just a rough patch. She'd been building her case. I put the documents back in the envelope, walked down the hall to the guest room and knocked on the door. A long pause. Come in. She was sitting in the armchair by the window, a book in her lap. She looked up when I came in. Her expression was careful, composed, the expression of someone who has rehearsed the moment. I held up the envelope. "Were you going to tell me?" I asked. "I was going to call Diane and ask her to reach out," she said. "I didn't know how to—" "You hired a lawyer, Catherine. You had my house appraised. You gave me 30 days. I kept my voice level. I wasn't going to raise it. You couldn't just talk to me first?" "I tried to talk to you," she said. "In September. That wasn't talking. That was you telling me you needed space." She closed her book, set it on the side table. "David, I know this is hard. Hard." I looked at her for a moment. "That's one word for it." She had the decency to look away. "Where will you go?" I asked. "I'll stay with Patricia in Scottsdale for a while. She has room, her sister, of course." I'd always sensed Patricia had never thought much of me. Too quiet, too plain, not ambitious enough in the ways she valued. "And the house," I said. "That's what the lawyers are for." "This is my house," I said quietly. "I built it. We built our life here together," she said firmly. "That's what the law looks at. Is that right?" "David, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just protecting myself." I looked around the guest room, at the curtains she'd picked out. The quilt her mother had made. The framed photo on the nightstand, the two of us in Santa Fe 15 years ago. She hadn't put it away yet. "I'll get a lawyer," I said. "That's probably wise." I walked back to the door, stopped with my hand on the frame. 32 years, Catherine," I said. Not angry, just honest. "You could have told me to my face." She didn't answer. I pulled the door closed behind me and stood in the hallway for a long moment. The house was very quiet, my house, built on my father's land. I walked to my office, sat down at my desk, and started looking for a lawyer of my own. I didn't know yet what I had, but I was starting to understand that I needed to find out. The next 2 weeks were the quietest of my life. Catherine and I moved around each other like strangers sharing a waiting room, polite, careful. We ate at different times. She took her coffee in the guest room. I took mine on the deck. We said good morning when we passed in the hallway, and good night when we didn't. The house that I'd built to be full of life had become a place where two people practiced the art of disappearing. I contacted 3 lawyers before I settled on Gene Holloway. He'd been recommended by an old colleague of mine, a retired contractor named Phil, who'd gone through a difficult divorce himself a few years back. Gene was quiet, methodical, not the kind of man who filled a room with his presence. But Phil said he was thorough, that he read everything, that he didn't miss things. I liked him immediately. We met in his office on a Wednesday afternoon. Small office, books everywhere, a framed engineering print on the wall that I appreciated. He read through Diane Pritchard's documents while I sat across from him. He didn't rush, didn't react much, just read. When he finished, he set the papers down and folded his hands. "Tell me about the property," he said. "How long have you owned it?" "The land?" I said. "My father deeded it to me in 1988, before Catherine and I were married." Something shifted in his expression, almost imperceptible. "Do you still have the deed?" "Somewhere, yes. In my files at home." "Find it," he said simply. "Before our next meeting." I didn't fully understand why, not yet, but I trusted the way he said it, like a man who'd just found a loose thread and wanted to see where it led. I went home that evening and started going through the filing cabinet in my office. 4 drawers, 30 years of paperwork, tax returns, utility records, warranties for appliances long since replaced, and somewhere in there my father's things. The documents I'd kept because you keep the things that matter, even when you don't know exactly why. It took me 2 hours. I found it near the bottom of the 3rd drawer, in a manila folder labeled in my father's handwriting. His script was careful, deliberate. He'd been a precise man. The folder contained the original land deed, a survey map, and a notarized transfer document, all dated 1988, all in my name alone. I sat at my desk and looked at them for a long time. Then I put them back in the folder, set them on top of the cabinet, and went to bed. It was around 2 in the morning when I heard her. I'd always been a light sleeper, an occupational habit from years of early job sites. The sound that woke me was laughter, muffled, coming from down the hall. Catherine's voice, low and animated. the way she used to sound when she was happy. I lay still for a moment, listening. Then I got up. Not to confront her, just to get a glass of water. I told myself that anyway. The hallway was dark. The guest room door was pulled almost closed, a thin line of light underneath it. As I passed, her voice became clearer. "No, I'm serious. He has no idea," she was saying. "He just accepted it. You know how he is. He never pushes back on anything." A pause. Her sister's voice probably tinny through the phone speaker. Then Catherine laughed again. Different kind of laugh than the one I remembered from that fundraiser in 1985. Sharper, lighter in a way that felt careless. "Diane says the valuation came in even higher than we expected," she said. "So that's good news. Either he buys me out or we sell it and I get half. Either way," another pause. "Either way, I'm finally getting out of here. And I'm not leaving empty-handed." I stood in the hallway. I didn't move. Didn't breathe too loud. Just stood there in the dark, in the house I built, listening to my wife of 32 years talk about it like it was a transaction. Like it was a number on a page. Like the life we'd made inside those walls was just inventory to be divided and liquidated. He has no idea. I thought about the foundation I'd poured myself. The walls I'd framed through 3 cold winters. The morning I'd carried Catherine over the threshold as a joke, because we'd forgotten to do it at the church, and she'd laughed so hard she'd nearly made me drop her. Either way, I'm not leaving empty-handed. I walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink, looking out at the dark shape of the Rockies against the night sky. Then I went back to my room, lay down on top of the covers, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't feel rage. Not exactly. What I felt was something colder and cleaner than that. A kind of clarity, the sort that comes when the last illusion finally dissolves, and you can see the situation for exactly what it is. She wasn't confused. She wasn't hurting. She wasn't lost. She knew precisely what she was doing, and she was certain, absolutely certain, that I didn't have the tools to stop her. The manila folder was still sitting on top of the filing cabinet. I thought about Gene Holloway, about the way he'd said find it with such quiet precision. I thought about my father and his careful handwriting, and the land he'd trusted me to know what to do with. And for the first time since that envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, I slept. I called Gene Holloway the next morning at 8 o'clock. He picked up on the second ring, which I appreciated. Men who answer their phones promptly tend to be men who take things seriously. "I found the deed," I told him, "and the survey, and the original transfer document. All from 1988. A brief pause. "Can you come in today?" I was in his office by 10. He took the folder from me carefully. The way you handle something you already suspect is important. Laid the documents out on his desk in order. The deed first, then the survey map, then the notarized transfer. He put on his reading glasses and went through each one slowly, running his finger along the legal descriptions, the lot numbers, the dates. I sat across from him and waited. I'd learned patience on job sites. You don't rush a man who's doing precise work. Finally, he took his glasses off and set them on the desk. "David," he said, "do you understand what you have here?" "Land," I said. "My father's land. Deeded to me before the marriage. Deeded solely to you," he said. "No joint tenancy. No community language. Your name only." He tapped the survey map. "And this survey, this is the same parcel the house sits on?" "Yes. I built the house on the northeast portion of the acreage. Right here." I leaned forward and pointed to the area on the map. "The house footprint sits entirely within the original deed boundaries." Gene nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't empty but full of thought. "In Colorado," he said carefully, "property owned by one spouse prior to the marriage is generally considered separate property. It doesn't automatically become a marital asset simply because time passes or because a marital home is built on it." He paused. "Now, there are arguments the other side can make. Commingling, contribution, improvements funded jointly. We'll need to look at the financials. But the foundation of their entire claim," he tapped the deed again, "is standing on sand." I let that settle. "She doesn't know," I said. "Wasn't a question. Based on what they've filed, I'd say her legal team didn't check, Jean said. They assumed the house was a marital asset because it functioned as the marital home. That's a reasonable assumption in many cases. But they didn't pull the land records. They assumed, I said. People often do, he said quietly. I looked at the deed. My father's name was on the transfer line, Harold James Mercer. And below it mine, David Arthur Mercer. The ink was faded, but the words were permanent. What happens now? I asked. Jean leaned back in his chair. We respond to their demand letter. We don't tip our hand completely, not yet. We ask for a full discovery process. Request documentation of all marital assets. Everything by the book. We let them build their case on their assumption. He looked at me steadily. And then, at the appropriate moment, we present this. At mediation, I said. That would be my recommendation. Let them walk into that room confident. Let them make their argument in full. A quiet pause. Then we show them the deed. I nodded. There was something almost architectural about it. The way a building's integrity comes not from how it looks on the surface, but from what's underneath. From the foundation that no one sees until something tries to tear it down. One more thing, Jean said. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and uncapped his pen. The survey. The 1988 survey. Do you know if anyone has updated it since then? I had it resurveyed in 2003, I said. When I added the workshop on the south end, I wanted to make sure I was within the parcel boundaries. And do you have that survey? It'll be in the same drawer, I said. I can have it to you by tomorrow. Jean made a note on the pad. Then he looked up at me over the top of his glasses. David, he said, I want you to understand something. This isn't guaranteed. Divorce proceedings are complicated, and the other side will push back hard when they see this. They may argue the land was effectively commingled by building the marital home on it. They may argue Catherine contributed financially to the improvements. We'll need to counter all of that. I understand, I said, but what I can tell you is this. He placed his hand flat on the deed, gently, like a man swearing on something true. The foundation of their case just changed considerably. I picked up the documents and slid them back into my father's folder. His handwriting on the tab, careful and deliberate, like everything he did. He'd left me the land because he trusted me to know what to do with it. I was starting to understand what that meant. I thanked Jean, shook his hand, and walked out into a bright November morning. The air was sharp and cold, the kind of cold that clears everything away and leaves only what's essential. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for a few minutes. Didn't start the engine right away. I thought about Catherine in that conference room, about Diane Pritchard and her measured efficiency, about the way they'd mapped out their strategy. Without ever thinking to look beneath the surface, they'd seen a house they hadn't looked at the land, and the land was mine. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday in December. Jean had spent 3 weeks preparing. Financials, tax records, construction logs I'd kept from the original build. I was an engineer. I documented everything. Material receipts, contractor invoices, the mortgage we'd taken out in 1991 for the interior finish work and paid off entirely by 1999, largely from my salary. Jean went through all of it, built a quiet, thorough counter-narrative. Not aggressive, just precise. The morning of the mediation, I wore my navy blazer. The one I kept for occasions that required a certain kind of presence. I didn't own many suits anymore. Retirement had simplified my wardrobe. But that blazer had seen me through job site presentations, town council hearings, my father's funeral. It fit right. It felt right. Jean met me in the lobby of the building, shook my hand, looked me over. How are you feeling? He asked. Ready, I said. He nodded. Let me do the talking when it matters. When I slide the documents across, don't say anything. Just let them read. Understood. We took the elevator to the 9th floor. The conference room was already occupied when we arrived. Diane Pritchard sat at the far side of the table, a leather portfolio open in front of her, a legal pad covered in notes at her elbow. She was composed, professional. She acknowledged Jean with a brief nod. Catherine sat to Diane's left. She was dressed carefully. A gray blazer, a silk blouse, her hair done properly. She looked, I realized, like a woman who had dressed for a victory. She glanced at me when I came in. then looked away. The mediator, a retired judge named Warren Solis, sat at the head of the table. Silver-haired, unhurried, he introduced himself, outlined the ground rules, and invited Diane to present Catherine's position. Diane was good. I'll give her that. She laid out the case with the kind of fluid confidence that comes from believing your argument is airtight. 32 years of marriage. Shared investment of time, effort, emotional labor. The house had functioned as the marital home for the entirety of the marriage. Catherine had contributed to its upkeep, its improvement, its character. She had foregone other financial opportunities to maintain the household. The property, valued at just under $900,000 by an independent appraiser, represented the primary marital asset. She presented the appraisal, the financial summary, a timeline of the marriage. Catherine sat beside her and nodded at the appropriate moments. She had the controlled expression of someone who'd practiced it, who believed the outcome was already decided. When Diane finished, Warren Solis looked at Jean. Counsel. Jean opened his portfolio. "Thank you, Judge Solis," he said. He didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke the way he always spoke, quietly, deliberately, without a single wasted word. "We don't dispute the length of the marriage, or Mrs. Mercer's contributions to the household. What we do dispute is the foundational premise of her claim." He paused. "The house as presented is a marital asset. But the house does not exist independently of the land it sits on, and the land is a different matter entirely." He reached into his portfolio and produced the deed, the survey, the 1988 transfer document, the 2003 resurvey. He stacked them neatly, then slid them across the table in a single, unhurried motion. Diane picked up the deed first. I watched her eyes move across the page, watched them slow, watched them go back to the top and start again. The room was very quiet. She picked up the survey, checked the parcel boundaries against the legal description in the deed, set it down, picked up the transfer document. "Read the date. Read my name." "Read it again." Catherine leaned toward her. "What is it?" Diane held up one finger. The gesture of a professional who needs a moment. Catherine sat back. Jean spoke into the silence. "The land on which the marital home was built was deeded solely to David Mercer in November of 1988 by his late father, Harold Mercer. The transfer predates the marriage by 14 months. The deed carries no joint tenancy language, no community property designation, and no spousal interest of any kind." He let that sit for a moment. Under Colorado statute, separate property brought into a marriage does not automatically convert to marital property. The land, 40 acres including the full footprint of the house, remains David's separate property. Catherine looked at Diane. "What does that mean?" Diane didn't answer immediately. "What does that mean?" Catherine asked again, sharper now. "It means," Diane said carefully, "that the house may be classified as a marital improvement on separate property." She set the documents down. "Which significantly complicates our position." "Complicates it how?" Catherine's voice had climbed slightly. The controlled expression was slipping. Warren Solis cleared his throat. "Ms. Pritchard, would you like to take a recess to review the documents?" "Yes," Diane said. "Please." Catherine turned to look at me fully for the first time since we'd sat down. Her eyes were searching, trying to find something to hold on to. Anger maybe, or a counter-argument. I looked back at her steadily. Didn't lean forward, didn't cross my arms, didn't offer anything. She turned back to Diane. "Can they do this? Can the land—" She stopped, started again. "I've lived in that house for 30 years, Catherine," Diane said quietly. "Let me read these properly, please." The mediator called a 15-minute recess. Diane and Catherine moved to the far corner of the room, heads together, voices low. I could see Catherine's jaw tightening. The precise, rehearsed composure she'd walked in with was fraying at the edges now. She gestured once, a sharp, frustrated movement, and Diane put a hand on her arm. Jean leaned toward me. "They'll come back with a commingling argument," he murmured. "Claim the land was effectively absorbed into the marital estate by building the home on it. And," I said quietly, "and we have 32 years of tax returns showing the land was always filed as your separate property, plus the construction records showing the primary funding source." He straightened his papers. "Their argument exists, but it's weak. When Warren Solis reconvened the session, Diane was composed again. Professional. But something had shifted in the room. The easy confidence of her opening was gone, replaced by something more careful, more measured. She made the commingling argument, competently. Catherine had contributed to improvements. The home had been maintained with marital funds. The land and the house could not reasonably be separated. Jean responded calmly, systematically, tax filings, construction records, the original mortgage in my name alone, 32 years of documentation, stacked against one assumption that nobody had bothered to verify. Warren Solis listened to both sides. Made notes, asked several precise questions. Then he looked at Diane. Pritchard with the steady gaze of a man who had heard 1,000 arguments and knew the difference between a strong one and a story. Counsel, he said, I think you and your client may want to reconsider the parameters of your settlement position. Catherine's head snapped toward him. What? But Warren Solis was already making notes on his pad, and Diane Pritchard was already reaching for her phone. The second session began 40 minutes later. Jean and I had waited in a smaller room down the hall. He'd made notes. I drunk a cup of coffee that tasted like cardboard and looked out the window at the Denver skyline, gray and flat under a December sky. I wasn't triumphant. I want to be clear about that. There was no surge of satisfaction, no quiet gloating. What I felt was closer to the feeling you get when a structure you've been worried about is inspected and confirmed sound. Not joy. Just the settling of something that had been uncertain. Jean looked up from his notes. They'll offer a revised settlement. Probably focus on liquid marital assets. Retirement accounts, savings, personal property. That's fair, I said. He looked at me over his glasses. You're willing to split the financials equitably? 32 years is 32 years, I said. I'm not here to leave her with nothing. I'm here to keep what's mine. He nodded slowly. Good. That posture will serve you well in there. When we returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had changed entirely. Diane Pritchard sat with her legal pad covered in new notes, her earlier fluency replaced by something more deliberate and contained. Catherine sat beside her, but the careful composure she'd worn all morning was gone. She looked smaller somehow. Not defeated exactly, but recalibrated. Warren Solis reconvened the session. Diane spoke first. In light of the documentation presented by opposing counsel, my client is prepared to revise her position regarding the primary property. She said it cleanly, professionally. But I could hear the effort underneath it, the sound of an argument being quietly dismantled and rebuilt from different materials. She outlined a revised settlement proposal. The liquid marital assets, savings accounts, my pension, Catherine's retirement fund from her teaching years, would be divided. Personal property split reasonably. The house and land removed from the marital asset column entirely. Catherine stared at the table while Diane spoke. When Diane finished, Warren Solis looked at Jean. Jean deferred to me with a slight nod. I hadn't planned to speak at length, but I'd thought during those 40 minutes in the side room about what I wanted to say. Not for the room, not for Diane or Warren Solis, for Catherine. I want to be fair, I said. My voice was steady, even. I always have been. The financial assets we built together over 32 years, I have no interest in fighting over those. We'll split them equitably. I paused. But the house stays. The land was my father's. He worked his whole life for it. He left it to me because he trusted me to take care of it. I built that house with my own hands, before Catherine and I even had a wedding date set in stone. That house is the most tangible thing I've made in my life. Another pause. It was never hers to take. The room was quiet. Catherine looked up at me then. For just a moment, the careful distance she'd maintained all morning dropped away, and I saw something cross her face that might have been recognition or regret. I couldn't be certain. It passed quickly. My client accepts the revised framework, Diane said, her voice professionally neutral. As does mine, said Jean. Warren Solis made his notes. The details took another hour to work through. Retirement accounts, the joint savings, the investment account we'd opened in 2008 and largely forgotten about until Jean's discovery process surfaced it. Personal property, furniture, vehicles. Catherine's gardening equipment that she'd want in Scottsdale. All of it handled quietly, item by item. Catherine spoke only twice during that hour. Once to ask about a particular savings account she wanted clarified. Once to confirm she'd arrange pickup of her personal belongings within 30 days. When it was done, Warren Solis thanked both parties and gathered his papers. Diane Pritchard closed her portfolio and began packing her bag. She glanced at Jean, a brief professional look that acknowledged without words how the morning had gone. Jean gave her a small nod in return. Catherine stood, put on her coat. She was moving with the mechanical precision of someone operating on will alone, getting through the motions of a moment she hadn't prepared for. At the door, she stopped. I thought she might not turn around, but she did. She looked at me across the length of the conference room. The mahogany table between us, the gray December light through the window. I didn't know, she said quietly, about the land. I know you didn't, I said, a long pause. You could have told me, she said. When the papers came. You could have said something. I considered that for a moment. You could have asked me, I said gently. Before you hired a lawyer. Before the appraisal. Before 30 days and a property demand. I held her gaze. You could have just talked to me. She had no answer for that. She turned and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft, definitive click. Jean set his hand briefly on my shoulder. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the gray city. 32 years. The fundraiser in Fort Collins. The thin-walled duplex. 3 winters of framing in the cold. The morning she'd stood in the empty living room and cried. All of it real. All of it over. But the house was still standing and it was still mine. Catherine's sister Patricia came up from Scottsdale 2 weeks after the mediation to help her pack. I gave them the house for 3 days. Stayed at a motel in Loveland. Clean place, nothing fancy. The kind where the towels are thin but the walls are quiet. I read a paperback I'd been meaning to finish. Walked to a diner for breakfast. Drove up into the foothills just to look at the mountains from a different angle. When I came back on the 4th day, Catherine was gone. The guest room was bare. Her quilt, her curtains, the framed photo from Santa Fe, all of it packed. The closet was empty except for a few wire hangers left on the rod. The bathroom shelf cleared of her things. It was efficient. Surgical almost. 32 years reduced to empty drawers and a few hangers. The rest of the house was different. Not damaged, but altered. The spaces where her presence had been were now just spaces. A gap on the bookshelf where her gardening books had been. An empty hook by the back door where her sun hat had hung. The kitchen counter where she'd kept a ceramic jar of wildflower seeds, given to her by a student years ago, now just bare granite. I walked through every room slowly, touching door frames, running my hand along the windowsill in the living room, the one she'd wanted facing west. The big windows. I'd built them exactly the way she'd asked. I didn't take them out. I won't. They're good windows. They let in the right light. A thing can be beautiful and still be a reminder of what's gone. The settlement was finalized in January. The financial split was fair. Jean made sure of that, and I wanted it that way. Catherine got half the savings, a portion of my pension, her own retirement intact. Enough to start over in Arizona without struggling. I wasn't interested in punishment. I never had been. She called once in February. I let it ring. She didn't leave a message. She called again in March. This time she did, David, her voice said from the speaker. I just wanted to say, a long pause. I'm sorry for how I handled it, not for wanting to leave, but for how I did it. You deserved better than that. I sat with that message for a day before I called her back. Thank you for calling, I said. I appreciate it, a silence. How are you? She asked. I'm all right, I said. The deck needs resealing. The pergola, too. I let it go this winter. A small sound that might have been a laugh. You always did keep up with that. Someone has to. Another silence, longer this time. David, I need to ask you something, she said. That morning, in the mediation, when Jean slid those documents across the table, had you known the whole time? Before the papers even came? Thought about how to answer that honestly. I knew the land was mine, I said. I'd always known that. My father made it clear when he deeded it. But I didn't understand what it meant, not legally, until Jean looked at the paperwork. I wasn't holding it back as a weapon, Catherine. I just didn't know it was a shield until I needed one. She was quiet for a while. I should have talked to you, she said. Yes, I said. You should have. We didn't talk long after that. She told me Arizona was warm. I told her the aspens had come in early this year. Small talk. The kind two people make when the real conversation has already happened, and there's nothing left but the weather and the seasons. We hung up gently. I don't think we'll speak again. And I've made peace with that. The spring came early this year. By April, I was back in the garden. Not Catherine's garden on the south side, but a new one on the east near the workshop. Nothing elaborate. Tomatoes, peppers, a row of herbs. Enough to keep my hands in the dirt on Saturday mornings. I resealed the deck. Restained the pergola. Fixed a gutter that had been pulling away on the north side. Something I'd been meaning to do for 2 years and kept putting off. It felt good to work on the house again without the weight of someone planning to take it. I think a lot about my father these days. Not with sadness. With a kind of quiet gratitude I didn't fully appreciate when he was alive. He wasn't a demonstrative man. Didn't say I love you often, maybe 3 times that I can remember. But he showed it in the ways that mattered. He showed up. He kept his word. And when he gave me that land, he told me something I only now understand at 40 years' distance. You'll know what to do with it, he'd said. I think he meant, keep it. Protect it. Don't let anyone take what's yours. But don't take what isn't yours either. Build something that lasts. And if the day comes when someone tries to pull it out from under you, make sure your foundation is deeper than they expect. He was right. I did know what to do with it. People ask me, and by people I mean Phil and a couple of the old guys I have coffee with on Wednesdays, whether I'm bitter. Whether I'm angry at Catherine, I'm not. I was hurt. I won't pretend otherwise. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing the person you built your life beside was building an exit while you were building a deck. It's not the pain of betrayal exactly. It's the pain of discovering you were living in 2 different marriages at the same time, yours and hers, and they never actually overlapped. But bitterness is a weight you carry for someone else's mistake. I'm too old for that. Too tired, maybe. And too interested in what comes next. I still live in the house. I still drink my coffee on the deck. The mountains are still there every morning, and they still take my breath when the light is right. The house is quieter now, but quiet isn't the same as empty. I've learned that. Catherine said that word once, empty, sitting across from me at the kitchen table trying to explain what was wrong. She had it backwards. The house was never empty. The marriage was, and I was too steady, too patient, too set in my ways to notice. Maybe that's my fault. Maybe I should have pushed harder, asked more questions, refused to accept the distance. Maybe I should have fought for the marriage the way I fought for the land. But some things you can't fight for alone. A marriage takes 2 people pulling in the same direction. When one person stops pulling and starts planning, the other person is just dragging weight that isn't there anymore. I don't regret the 32 years. I regret the last 6 months of them. The ones I spent not seeing what was right in front of me. The ones she spent not telling me. A man called me last week. A younger fellow, 35, works in construction. Friend of a friend. Going through something similar. Wife wants the house, the business, everything. He asked me what I'd learned. I told him, know what you own. I don't mean the money or the property, though that matters. I mean know what's yours. Your character, your word, your work, your dignity. Know where your foundation is. Because the day will come when someone tries to build a case on top of it and claim it for their own. And when that day comes, you'd better be able to reach into a drawer somewhere and find the proof that you were there first. He thanked me. I'm not sure it helped. These lessons are the kind you only really learn by living through them. The light is going gold on the Rockies right now. The big west-facing windows are doing exactly what Catherine designed them to do, letting the last of the day pour across the living room floor. I built the frame. She chose the glass. And for a little while, that was enough. I'll sit here a while longer. Then I'll make dinner for one, which I've gotten better at than I expected. I'll wash the dishes. I'll check the locks. I'll go to bed in the room where I've slept for 32 years. In the house I built with my own hands, on the land my father trusted me to keep. And in the morning, I'll get up, make my coffee, and step out onto the deck. The mountains will be there. The light will be there. The quiet will be there, and so will I.